and I saw these little, it was foggy because my eyes felt foggy, but I saw these little beings walking around the side of the bed and by the window.
And what did they look like?
They were like big headed, and they were like small bodied, and they look like the little grays that you see in the pictures that people have all the time now that you see.
Okay.
And they were about 3 feet high, and there was about 4 or 5 of them, and they were kind of milling about, like walking around. I, immediately, it was like all my recollection, all of my pre-programming or that download or the awakenings that I've had or the uploads or sending myself up into these ships, whatever all my experiences had been up until this point, all of a sudden, like everything turned on. It was like,
you just led into my next question.
Okay.
You just led right into it perfectly. We must have some sort of telepathic thing going on here.
Okay.
Because what I was going to say was, before the core upgrade that you tell all about, your energetic shift in your book, you did have a profound encounter with Riz Mirza's channeling. And I wonder if you could actually walk us through that first circle of light experience.
Yeah.
And how the messages that you personally received, particularly from your deceased loved ones, prepared you for the extraordinary events that unfolded as your life proceeded.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I am Lady O, and I'm here with Dennis Strahl, and this is our show, Quantum Mysteries. And I am the co-host of many episodes of different programs and shows that I do with my husband, psychic medium and trance channel Riz Mirza, on the Mystic podcast. But this is a very special segment of a new series that I have put together with Dennis Strahl, who has joined me before. This is our kind of a revamp of an earlier, it's a show podcast that we had started in 2020 on the United Starseeds Connections YouTube channel. And it was right after or during COVID. And Dennis, we had such a good time, didn't we?
We sure did. You bet. A lot of fun.
Yeah. So Dennis is an experiencer himself. I as well am an experiencer, and that's what this show is about, and that's what this segment is about, is our experiences, and also much, much more. We're going to be covering so many topics I can't even begin to tell you. It is everything regarding the supernatural, metaphysical, and especially UFO and alien abduction, alien kind of intervention, surgery, multidimensional experiences that not only we have had, but other people have had. And we're going to discuss all of that. It's going to be just really exciting. And I cannot wait. And I'm very, very happy that we came back together after all these years to pick up where we left off.
Absolutely.
So Dennis, say a little bit about yourself so people know who is my co-host.
Well, some of the subjects that we had discussed before in the previous podcast that we did, that undoubtedly we will be touching on in this series, is, we are both quite knowledgeable in the, UFO category. I mean, I attended the first 7 years of the largest UFO conference on the planet, lasts for 4 days, called Contact in the Desert. And so I was there for all 7 years from 2012 to 2019. And that is still continuing. I just haven't been back since. And then both Araya and myself have been studying everything to do with frequencies. Everything has a frequency. And so we've looked into, frequency healing of all kinds, light healing, and what all frequencies can do, because everything has a specific frequency. A malady, an ailment has a specific frequency. Health has a specific frequency. And so one of the subjects, in fact, that both Araya and I have great interest in is called cymatics. and that's spelled Cymatis. And there's a lot of great, documentaries on YouTube, but we'll go further into that later on. But basically, cymatics is about sound producing form, and we will explain what we mean by that. So we're going to be pretty diverse in the subjects that we cover. This beginning episode, we're going to be talking a whole lot about Araya's fabulous new book, and I'll let her tell you what the title is now, and we'll kind of go from here into that direction.
The name of my book is Alien Upgrades, and it is a new dimension and alien abductions. And the reason why I have that subtitle is because the average person, first of all, if they're even interested in aliens to begin with, are somewhat familiar with abductions. So my particular case was not a physical abduction. My case was an interdimensional surgery. It's like an ethereal surgery that upgraded my system. And because it was so unusual and because it was multidimensional and I was half in my own room and half on the ship, I did it. My cognitive brain, my rational thinking brain could not understand how any of this was possible. So it took me many, many years to gather myself together, not only from the upgrade itself, but also to begin to even speak about it. The incident happened in 2010. It's taken me this long. I finally just rewrote my second book and revised it with tons and tons of new information and enhanced what I already had talked about on the first book, and bringing in a lot of references, stats, and other experiencers who have experienced the same thing and who do talk about an ethereal type of surgery. So I want to go deep into this conversation by telling my story of actually what happened. I'm going to go play by play. And I am going to first start off with giving you a little backstory. And then Dennis, who's going to be so kind in the next few episodes, are going to be helping me to uncover a lot of things and asking questions, and questions that you all may also have about my experience, because it is a little out there. And for some people, if you don't already think went off the deep end, this is a good chance. You're probably going to feel that way now. But what I want to stress that the reason it took me so long, for obvious reasons, but the main reason why it took me so long is I needed to do a tremendous amount of research. I needed to do hypnotherapy regressions. I needed to read a lot of books. I needed to go and talk to a lot of people and find out if I was not alone or has this happened to other people. That was like my primary issue was, I know this happened, and Riz was there in the room. He knows it happened. And my entire life changed after that day, and I never went back to the way I was before. So I know this happened, and I needed to get validation from other experiencers that I'm not alone. So I have felt up until now a little bit of a lone wolf situation where I do feel like I've been by myself and isolated, not really talking about it as openly as I wanted to. Originally I tried, but I wasn't prepared, and I felt I was too vulnerable, and I felt way too exposed when I went on some podcasts many years ago when my first book came out. And I retracted from all of those experiences because it was too public for me at the time, and I wasn't ready, because I needed to get more of a grip on what happened and what is happening, because this is a current phenomenon in my life. So that's why this new forum, this new platform, that's why this new segment of our podcast, that's why the new book, everything is about really wanting to properly present this situation so it's fully understandable, and there'll be a lot of education involved in this too. So before I begin, Dennis, do you have any thoughts or any words before I begin?
Will just contribute here. I have had the pleasure of reading an advanced copy of Araya's book. front to back, cover to cover. And she is very, very articulate and detailed in the way that she explains her experience, and did a tremendous amount of research in order to determine, are there any other experiencers out there that experienced what I experienced? Because I think anybody that's had a very, very unique and intense experience that is undeniable once you go through it, you can feel the changes.
Right.
And if ultimately you read Araya's book, and through the course of these this series of podcasts we're doing, you'll recognize that she has done a tremendous amount of research in this direction. And there are a lot of other people out there, even though you yourself personally, well, I've never heard anything like this before. Right. Never heard of it. Well, I think that probably that's kind of when it first happened. That may have been how Araya was feeling. It's like, wow, is this unique to me? Mm-hmm. Feels like it. Because until you experience something, sometimes you have no reason to research if anybody else has experienced it.
Right.
Because you wouldn't know what to search for.
Yeah, I didn't. There was not a lot of terms actually to describe it. We're in the Wild West. We're creating something new. This is brand new in the sense that people didn't even know this was a thing to talk about. People didn't know how to explain it. People didn't know what it is. Now you go online on Google and you can see, if you research, people are talking about alien upgrades where they don't leave their bed. It happens in their dreams, or it happens when they're awake. They are taken to a ship and brought back, and they are upgraded. They have exceptional skills. They speak different. They talk different. Their personality is adjusted. So there's so many. This is like, for the average person, this is crazy talk. This is so unusual. How could this be? And it's funny because it's happening to more and more people. And it's like, it's simply put, alien upgrades. These are alien induced, like they're intervening into our humanity and helping to upgrade our consciousness. So what I want to do is I want to start with the early childhood experiences to set you up as to my background, because some of the experiencers I have read about, this started young when they were children. This is when their first introduction to spirituality in a big way. So I want to start with when I was 5 years old. I had a unusual experience in my living room. And so, Dennis, do you remember I asked you about that, or I talked to you about that?
Yes, I sure do.
Yeah. So I had a moment where my mom was just sitting in the living room, and I was cleaning the house that day with a little broom, and I was minding my own business, being 5 years old and living an ordinary 5-year-old life. And all of a sudden it was like I was jolted. I remember my spine straightening and my head went up, and I looked straight up in the middle of the living room, a square living room. I looked directly up above me to the ceiling, and I felt this beam of light. But my mom said she swears that she didn't see any beam of light, but I could see it in my dimension. And it was like a beam of light came straight from the top of the ceiling right to the top of my head. I felt the top of my head illuminate, activate. It was like a activated, illuminated, buzzing feeling. It went through my body. My head went back, my arms went out, and I took this giant breath. And it was like, I felt like I had like something went in me, or I was awakened or activated. And this wasn't the alien surgery that the book is about. This was just the precursor. This is what happened when I was younger that I felt like gave me a heads up that something was going to happen in this lifetime. So I had my arms outstretched. I took a deep breath, and tears started rolling down my eyes because I started feeling this love that near-death experiencers feel. This love, this immense love, this love that can't be explained, a love that's bigger than the planet, than the universe. It's like the most extraordinary type of experience, like a million trillions of beings all together holding you and singing loving, uplifting songs to you. That's what it felt like. And I'll never forget it. And my heart just burst. I felt like my cells burst, my whole little body burst, and I started crying, and I felt like my throat was opening, and like I thought I didn't know what was going to happen to me. I literally thought I was going to have an out of body experience. Looking back at my 5-year-old self, going and reviewing my memories of that day and putting myself back in that moment, which wasn't too hard to do because it was such an extraordinary moment. I remember the only reference I had to God and was Jesus through my Sunday school courses at the church I went to as a Christian at the time.
Mhm.
So I said to my mom, I said, "Mom, Jesus loves me. He really loves me." Because that was the communication that was coming through, and I didn't have a word for it. So my head was back and I started spinning. And it's every time I talk about this moment, I get really choked up because it was really one of the most extraordinary moments I've ever had in my life. So I started spinning and I started spinning and I couldn't stop spinning and my arms were out like this. My head was up and I was spinning in circles saying, "Mom, you don't understand." So my mom was half nervous, half smiling. She might have had watery eyes. She was happy for me and very confused. So her face had all these different expressions and she kept saying to me, "I know, honey, of course he loves you. I know it. Yes, it's almost like she wanted to say it's okay." And then it made me so angry that my mom did not understand. She did not understand what I was experiencing. And in that moment, I felt like this separation of, oh, we're not in this together. This is personal to me because why doesn't she understand to the level I'm getting it? And she didn't get it at that level. And so I remember I started crying because I was upset about that. And I got mad at her and I stopped and I put my hands in my fists like this and I looked at her face. She was across the room and I said, "No, no, you don't understand. He really loves me." And I lost it and went in deeper. And then I just like felt like I just became one with the universe in that moment. The spinning kept going and I just kept taking in this energy and taking in it just was like overwhelming love. And it was like blackout after that. And I don't remember anything until the next incident that happened in that house.
Meanwhile, it was literally a tsunami wave of love download that only you were experiencing, and you had those feelings. That's why it just came back to you just now.
Yeah.
And made you a little emotional because it was a very
Right
emotional experience, wasn't it?
very emotional.
Intensely emotional?
Very. And it reminded me when I look back, I had an opportunity one time when Riz was channeling in Hawaii. There was a whirling dervish that came to visit before his channeling and he started spinning. And I asked Riz, why was he spinning? And he says, "Oh, this is a part of their connection to God." And I was dumbfounded. I was like, "What do you mean?" That's what I did. And so I looked up what a whirling dervish is to be able to read it to our viewers in a way that I will not, I don't want to mess it up. So I want to say it properly. So a whirling dervish is a member of the Mevlevi order. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing it 100% correctly, which is a Sufi Muslim order founded in the 13th century by the followers of the Persian poet and mystic Rumi, which I had a lot of deep, powerful connections to this poet in my early days after the alien surgery in 2010.
Mm-hmm.
The whirling dance that they do, known as the Sufi whirling, is a form of physical active meditation. They spin in circles and it's meant to bring them closer to God. It symbolizes a spiritual journey and it's really beautiful to watch. And they wear this white, you've seen them, right, Dennis? They wear this like white
Yes.
kind of
Oh,
skirt
yeah.
and they tilt their head to the side and they put their hand up and they go in this circle. It gives me chills thinking about it.
And it's deeply spiritual for them.
Yes. And I was doing that at 5 years old, didn't know that that's what was happening. And so I was deeply in communion. Afterwards, I got to tell you the second incident. I'm not going to go as deep into this one because this is an entire show by itself. I didn't know what happened until literally 5 years ago, when I've had some deep conversations with the spirit guides at Risk Channels. And I asked them questions about this night. I should say it was every night for a week. So my parents lived in a little 1-bedroom, simple little house on Ball Road in Anaheim, California. And I was a little girl, didn't need a lot of space. So they put me on the day bed that was in the living room, and the living room had a sliding glass door. So that was my bedroom. And my mom used to put me in a sleeping bag because I was one of those bicyclists when I sleep, and all my covers would be constantly coming off every night and I'd wake up cold. So she bought me a sleeping bag because that's going to contain me. So, so I was in the sleeping bag, sleeping in the living room on my little day bed. And I would wake up in the middle of the night, and I could see cars going by the curtains. You could hear the whir of the car going by on the boulevard every now and then, the headlights. And I heard this jiggling. And there's no curtains on this glass doors, double pane glass doors. There was no curtain. So I could see through the little porch light, I could see a silhouette. I looked up and I saw this giant, it looked like, back then I thought it was a monster. And that's how I knew to say it. It was giant. Its head reached the top of the door. So I assume maybe 10 feet high. And the shoulders were like 6 feet across, giant shoulders. It was very furry and it was very dark. And it would juggle this door. And I heard this little low growl, like its mouth was closed. And I could hear this deep rumble, and it would come through, like I could hear it in my room. Now, in the early days, when this first started happening, it lasted for a week. I thought it was a dream, but I would be literally awake because I would be moving my head around and covering my face with the sleeping bag and try to hide in the sleeping bag so he couldn't see me. And every time a car went by, I would move a little bit more down to the bottom of the sleeping bag. So I didn't want him to hear me or see me move because I thought he was going to attack me and eat me alive. Like this was a monster. And so every day I would tell my mom about this monster, and it acted the same every single night. And it went away after a week. I was never been more terrified in my life. Well, fast forward all these years later, I found out why I have such a obsession over Bigfoot. I have a deep connection, psychic connection. And now I understand that was a multidimensional experience. And I am very deeply connected to cryptids, and especially Bigfoot. And it has to do with this time period where I was first awakened. That was like my first awakening, was in that house.
Yeah, that's an interesting subject too, because I've been noticing how many new episodes are showing up on both the History channel and the Discovery channel. And there's entire episodes searching for Bigfoot, searching for the Yeti, searching for Sasquatch, all the different names that they go by.
I watch every single one that comes out.
And it's interesting too, in that more and more it seems like some of them are drawing the conclusion that the reason that they disappear the way that they do is that they are able to go in and out of another dimension. In
Absolutely.
other words, some of the science fiction, Dr. Strange, how he creates a portal, and goes through it, and the portal closes.
Yes.
Now he's somewhere else.
Yes. They have the ability to dematerialize also. So it could be that they're already in this advanced state where they could dematerialize, even if there was no portal. I feel like it could be either a portal or just the ability to dematerialize. And I can't wait in our future episodes also to talk about Skinwalker Ranch, which is another one of our obsessions. And I am very excited about that. And talking about the portals on the planet.
What's so interesting, I think, about that show is how they analyze everything very, very, very scientifically with cutting edge energy sensing instruments.
Yes.
That most of us, myself included, I didn't even know that an instrument like that existed.
Yes.
And they're showing you they've got all their oscilloscopes and the frequencies jumping and detecting all of these different things. And it's really quite fascinating. Yeah. That'll be fun to go into later on.
Absolutely. I definitely need to talk about that because if Skinwalker Ranch could really do what Bigelow couldn't do and actually isolate and get the measurements and actually find a way to really measure more than they already have, but make it almost to the point where it's undeniable that there's a portal here, which is pretty much at that point right now. But like to the average person or to scientists, this is our first proven by our technology, our science proven portal that we have discovered. So this is groundbreaking. I think it's really exciting. So, I'm going to continue with my story. So let's go back to, okay, so those are my 5-year-old experiences. So now fast forward, I had my time.
Now, I have a series of questions that I had set aside here that I wanted to ask you. In your book, Alien Upgrades, you open with a deeply personal account of your early life, which you somewhat covered already, and the whirling dervishes at the age of 5, and how that all hinted at, realities beyond our normal senses, because your entire experience throughout the book, as far as your energy modifications, is all about energy alterations that are undeniable. So you also described significant periods of missing time in your childhood, and particularly between the 1st and 3rd grade.
Yes.
And later a jarring experience with your cousin near Fresno. Yep. What was the impact of these unexplained voids in your developing understanding of reality, and what you did later on come to realize about these experiences?
So the first time missing experience is I don't have a recollection of the 1st grade to the 3rd grade. I have such a deep block that even if my parents tell me or told me, because they've passed on, where I was, what school I was, what location or anything about that time period, I can't retain it. It is like a block. It's like a lockbox. It was funny enough, my kindergarten year, which is the big year that I had all these experiences. I remember vividly so many things, from going to Francis Scott Key Kindergarten School to the situation in the living room, to the Bigfoot, to conversations I've had with my parents, things I used to wear and do. I was very aware and awakened in my 5-year-old kindergarten self. Right. But when I got to the 1st grade, there was a blackout, and I don't remember the 1st grade. I don't remember anything until the 3rd grade. I kind of started to come back in the 3rd grade. By the 4th grade, I was fully back, and I remember everything. But those are missing years that I have no idea. And in my own meditative regression, I think I knew that these years weren't important for me to be here, my consciousness. And I think I just spent a lot of time somewhere else other than inhabiting myself, so that my little self can just learn the developmental skills of just being human. Okay. But I didn't need I didn't need my awareness and my conscious self mostly here. So I think that's what happened. I could have been on a ship. In my regression, it does show that I did spend a lot of time on a ship during my childhood. So that's probably what happened.
I never told you this before, Araya, but actually I had a very similar experience. I have little or no memory of kindergarten, 1st grade, or 2nd grade, but I can actually remember the name of my 3rd grade teacher. So now, some of the grades after 3rd grade, I couldn't tell you the name of the teacher, but I do remember her name was Mrs. Barrington. So she was the sweetest little old lady. She was such a good teacher. I just loved her. So I can remember that, but trying to recall prior to that. Now, I had some mystical experiences we'll talk about another time during those years that did stick with me because they were kind of emotional, like what you experienced.
Yes.
So, yeah, it's interesting what's going on with our conscious mind versus our subconscious mind, and we'll be going more into that, folks, as we proceed through these episodes. But and I think I enjoy it when we talk about these types of subjects, Oriah, because the very fact that we both have little or no recall prior to third grade, and then from third grade forward, we have much better recall.
Yeah.
There are probably a number of people watching this that are thinking to themselves, if they hadn't brought that up, I would not have remembered. But now that I think about it, I had a similar experience. Why is that?
Well, to take it further, there's some people who actually remember the day of their birth. I actually remember coming home from the hospital from my birth and being in a room. And I described it to my mom one day. I said, Mom, I remember when I was a baby in this, I think I was like in a closet. It was a very tiny, tiny room. And she goes, come on, you got to be joking. Did your dad tell you this? And I said, no. I said, I could describe to you exactly what it looked like. I said, you walked upstairs into the apartment, and then you hang a left, you go through the living room, and then there's the bedroom, you go to the right, and on the right hand side there's a walk-in closet or something. There was some sort of inlet, some sort of it looked like a closet that had been converted into like my little nursery.
Right.
She stared at me and she goes, this is insane. This is incredible. I don't understand how you know this. We weren't living there very long. I think you were 6 months when we moved out. It was an apartment in Santa Monica. So I actually saw but I was looking at myself out of my body. I saw
that's amazing.
As a baby in the crib. I could describe the entire room, the where they lived. I could tell you everything about that apartment. But I was outside of my body. I was not in that little tiny infant body. I think my consciousness is too big. I think we all are too big to actually stay full time in that little tiny newborn body. But we hover around. I think we hang out with our parents.
Interesting little story about that I'll share very quickly.
Yes.
As far as being out of your body and looking at yourself.
Yeah.
And I believe that it was the channel Esther Hicks who channels Abraham.
Yes.
She usually does a Q&A type of a scenario, similar to what Riz does.
Yes.
Anyhow, this subject came up. And Abraham mentioned, we know that sometimes parents report when they have a newborn peeking around the corner into their bedroom where their crib is, and they see an angel standing there looking over the infant, their infant. Mm-hmm. And they think that it's, one of God's angels, so to say.
Right.
But it's actually your child.
Yeah.
In their ethereal form, looking after their new body and consoling it and making sure that you're okay.
That's correct.
So it's you that's looking at you.
Yes. It's so true. And I think that's what happens is we leave for certain periods of time where it's not necessary for us to be here. Yes. And when our mind starts to activate around the third or fourth grade, where we start to become hyper aware. Now that's back in our day, Dennis.
Right.
Because like you graduated high school, I think before I was even born, which you look amazing. And I am in the 70s. These kids nowadays, these crystal children and these rainbow children, like these children are coming in very aware and they're very awake from the earliest memories. And I think they stay with their bodies. But back in our day with our technology, I don't think it was necessary for us to hang around in our little bodies until we were ready.
Well, and a lot of the things I think that we experienced back then, because nobody talked about that kind of stuff at all, we were reluctant out of fear of criticism.
Yes.
And trying to dismiss your experience, whatever you had, as being not real. So you just kept your mouth shut. I remember you were mentioned, that you had, and it's part of your book too, used a regressionist hypnotist, that they do not only so-called past life regressions, but they also do regressions to a previous experience on an ET ship, so to say. Mm-hmm. And Dolores Cannon is famous for that.
Yeah.
And she has a lot of interesting input in regards to these type of situations, but I do remember her saying one time, she says, I started all this stuff back in the 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
The word metaphysical was unknown in the 1960s.
Right.
Hypnosis was somewhat known, but not to the degree that, that I have developed it, which she specialized in past life regression, and then ended up doing 20 years worth of people coming to her and saying, I think that I had an ET experience and I think they took me on the ship.
Right.
Can you put me under hypnosis and take me there?
Yeah.
But once again, she says there were a lot of things that I couldn't, when I first started this, I couldn't talk about it because nobody was going to understand. They never even heard of it. And so I agree with you that things have changed, haven't they?
A lot.
Because there are so many people now that have had experiences. They may still be reluctant to talk about it for fear of criticism, in particular, because usually who would they usually talk to it about?
Right.
Or talk about it to? Most of the time, a family member or a friend. Well, they really don't want getting criticism from that.
Right.
If they're going to discuss it at all, they're going to discuss it with a stranger at Starbucks, right?
Right.
That's kind of a safe zone, because then, if they discuss it with somebody at home and that person at home doesn't understand, they think they're crazy, they're going to bring it back up and throw it in their face over and over again. So it's like, I'm not going to talk about it.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us probably had some of those experiences. Later on, as we progress, I have had some experiences like that I never, both my parents are gone now, but I never told them, that occurred to me when I was a young child.
Well, what I'm about to tell you next is something similar that happened to you, and you're going to tell your story. We'll definitely do it next time, but
yes,
it's a time missing story. So
yeah.
I was with my cousin. I was in my 20s and we were traveling from Oregon down to Los Angeles. It was a regular road trip we took to visit my family. And it was 2 a.m. We used to love to drive at night. Back then, when you're young, you don't care. And so we would leave at like 10 o'clock p.m. because it's not hot and you could be on the road and there was nobody out there. And so we drove. And so on the freeway, there's an area by Fresno and on the Grapevine that's pretty wide open. There's like a lot of farms and like it's kind of rural area before you get into Fresno. And Fresno to us is kind of like a midway point, and we feel like that's the halfway. And we always kind of take a marker like, oh, okay, we hit Fresno, so we have X amount of time to get to LA. So we kind of know, and it's just routine. So we were driving and it was around 2. I always get the times a little bit messed up because it's a long time ago, but I think it was around 2:15 a.m., which is funny because that's around the time that you also had this experience.
Right.
So it was around 2:15 and we were driving and laughing. Music was on. We were yelling and telling jokes and just having a great time. And we saw the reflective green light like zip by and it said, "Welcome to Fresno." It was on. I was driving. My cousin was in the passenger side and we saw it go by. And we looked at each other. We're like, okay, cool. So we hit Fresno. Awesome. We're doing good time. We looked at the clock. We looked at the clock and it said 2:15. We took note and that was it. We just kept driving. And all of a sudden, it was like I would feel like in my body clock tells me it was around a 15-minute period of time that went by. And I was talking, laughing. Everything was the same. And then the sign went by again and it said, "Welcome to Fresno." Again. And we looked at the clock and we looked at the sign and each other all pretty fast. And the clock said 2:35. And we were like, it was either 2:25. I think it was 2:25. And we looked at each other and we were like laughing still. And we were like, how can that say "Welcome to Fresno" again? That's impossible. And we were kind of laughing. And then all of a sudden it was like this little, this little ticker tape or something, just it went to the brain and the brain registered and his brain registered and my brain registered at the same moment. And we shut down all dialogue and communication. We went completely silent. And like zombies, we drove for I don't know how long because our brain couldn't process what just happened because it's outside of the normal human nature or natural experience.
And I imagine because the Twilight Zone was definitely airing back then. And you, in a way, we're having a Twilight Zone
Yeah,
moment. It's like, what
exactly.
in the
Yeah.
world happened here? What happened to that block of time?
Well, we didn't even discuss it with each other after that first initial shock because we couldn't talk. We were in
Yeah,
deep shock. And the more we went into the shock, it was like all of a sudden our subconscious started to recollect. We started to go into an altered state. So all of a sudden it was just like our bodies were there. We didn't
right.
speak or talk to each other for hours. And we just kept driving in silence. I can remember hearing the sound of the road whirring under the tires.
Yeah,
But I don't have, we did not say a word. I just remember my hands feeling very like like a doll hands, like gummy, loose. They were on the steering wheel, just driving rote. My eyes were just straight, no blinking. And he was the same. And the reason we did that, looking back, is because not only did we go into shock, but there was remembrance, but they had blocked our memory. So
right.
there was a memory of something happening, but then we felt the block and then we knew something happened. Then our recollection of what could possibly have happened, and with our rational mind trying to understand what could have happened, sent us deeper into it because of course we were taken.
The drone sound of the tires at a steady speed can be very hypnotizing.
Very hypnotic.
So here you'd had this experience. You were kind of in a hypnotic,
Yes.
state of mind anyway, because again, long road trip, the tires are making exactly the same sound at the same rhythm because you're going a steady speed. So you add that to your experience and it becomes very hypnotic / mystical in ways that are challenging to explain.
Challenging is the right word. I actually was so uncomfortable in my body and so terrified and had so much fear. But then all of a sudden, just as much as I had those feelings, it seemed to be overridden with a feeling of your calmness. I wouldn't say euphoria, but it was definitely an altered state where I was in another state of consciousness. So then there was no fear in that state. So my human body was experiencing something wrong. But then there was another version of me that knew or agreed to or felt there was something bigger that I am not ready for right now.
Right.
So I just left it. I didn't address it or broach it, and we never spoke of it again. I think we tried to speak of it one more time. We no longer speak, unfortunately, because of our various belief systems are different nowadays. But
Right.
yeah, that's what happened. And so that was a very big, distinct time missing story. So now we put like kind of a line of demarcation. I move on with my life. I've married, divorced. I have 5 kids at this point when I married my current husband, Riz, and I was 37 years old when I met him. And so during this time, I'm building my business. I'm an entrepreneur. I do consulting and coaching, and I'm very, very busy. And I now am newly married. In this lifetime, I was determined to get it right. So I wasn't willing to give up on love yet. So even
And I
when
can
it didn't work,
say that I know that she got it right because I met Araya and Riz before they got married, which was what, 12 years ago now?
no, well, 2010. We got married in 2011, but we started dating in 2009.
And they graciously invited me to their wedding that was held in Malibu. Spectacular wedding. Oh my gosh. At a beautiful big mansion. There was like a couple hundred people there, sit down dinner, live entertainment. It was quite an experience. So I've known Riz and Araya for a long time now. And so we had the opportunity, besides our previous podcast, to discuss a variety of different things. I've been to Riz's as he calls it, the circle of light, where a group of people get together and he goes into trance, and usually Chief Red Eagle comes through first, and then nobody knows who's going to come through next, and he's channeled all types of different people. So lots of mystical experiences, in particular for Riz and Araya, more so probably than any other couple that I know. because Oriah, in her own right, is a shaman. And so we don't get too far off track here. But could I move on to my next question for you?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So I know that your father's influence with his deep fascination for UFOs and his work at Lockheed Martin played a significant role in your upbringing.
Yes.
How did his unconventional interests and the theories surrounding Lockheed Martin unknowingly prepare you for the extraordinary events that you would later unfold in your life, that you were able to relate back then to what your dad was into?
Well, that is a very good question. Wow. So my dad, for just to put it bluntly, was what I thought at the time was a UFO enthusiast. And so what that looked like was I was an only child, and I think from my earliest memories that I could even remember, definitely into my junior high school years, my dad would be off from work, and the only thing he wanted to do, really, and I have gone over this a million times, but the only thing, and I'm certain of it, because I tried to remember if he did anything else other than this. So it was a level of obsession. He would
Right.
shut the curtains, shut the windows, so it was all dark in the living room, and he would pop in a UFO disclosure tape, a VHS at the time, and he had
Yep.
bookcases, and to him, those were his crowning jewels. Like, though they were the most precious things in the world to him. They were his everything. They were gems, and he didn't let anybody touch it in the case. He took very good care. And anytime he went to a garage sale, he'd look through the VHS tapes to see if he can find more, UFO tapes. Because
Sure.
back then, it was really hard to get your hands on those kind of things. You'd have to write to a company, or it'd be very difficult to
Much more
get.
obscure to obtain.
Of course. So
Yes.
he had rows and rows and rows of these VHS tapes, of these UFO tapes. And I don't know
Wow.
where they are. I wish I had that collection, but so he'd put it in and he'd sit there and watch. And I was an empath back then and didn't know it. And I could read his face, and he had the most serious expression. And I had, I didn't know why. I had never seen any reference to any other parents or any other adults that would have that expression. So I didn't
Right.
know why my dad always was looking at it. It was like a surgeon. It looked like a surgeon who was doing the most nanoscopic surgery,
Yeah.
tiniest little surgery on something. That's how he was watching these videos. And I would sit
Sure.
there. I wanted nothing to do with it. I thought it was kind of ridiculous. I didn't know why he
Right.
was looking at little gray aliens all the time, why he was watching. And he sometimes would try to talk to me about it. He didn't have a good relationship with my mom, so I don't think there was a lot of conversations
Right.
about this topic. I had more interest in mystical things my whole life and fantasy things, but
Right.
I didn't have any interest in UFOs. I didn't have any interest in these alien topics. And so this went on, uh, until the day he died, and he died in his 50s. Unfortunately, I was only in my 20s, and he had a massive heart attack, but he worked at Lockheed, and his father, Robert Ellis Miller, also worked at Lockheed and was an executive and worked in, they said, the buying department, where you buy materials for the ships and the rocket ships and whatever it is they're making at Lockheed, like the planes and the fighter jets. But he was at the executive level. He was there for 35 years. He met his wife. She worked there. So his wife and him both worked there. Then my dad worked there. And then briefly my aunt worked there. And then she ended up becoming a TWA airline stewardess. So I have this history with Lockheed Martin. I had this
Right.
history looking back at my dad and seeing him being obsessed with UFOs, talking about really strange things with me all through my years at the house when I lived there until I was 18. The conversations he had with me are not the conversations I saw any other father having with their kids. So I was listening to the most advanced, obscure, detailed information about multidimensional reality and aliens, and I didn't know what he was talking about.
Well, and I'll just interject here too, contemporarily speaking, Martin Lockheed, speaking of, as they call it, ufology, UFOlogy, Martin Lockheed has quite a reputation for not only working on so-called secret aircraft for the U.S. military, stealth planes, the SR-71, stuff like that, but also there have always been rumors that they are the ones that get the wreckage from Roswell, New Mexico in 1947, for example,
right,
and are then ordered to reverse engineer the UFO technology. Now, nobody really knows, but that's been talked about for many, many years. And I just found it fascinating that both your dad and your grandfather both worked at the very company that has these rumors flying all around. And very often, rumors are more truthful than people want to believe.
Well, the
And
whistleblowers,
as David Wilcock often says, he says some of these, so-called science fiction films that you watch, you need to watch them more from a perspective as if they are a documentary.
Yeah.
And one of the examples that he gives is Stargate SG-1. The Stargate portal.
Yeah.
That they activate and just step right onto another planet, walk through it, and they're all of a sudden we're on another planet in another galaxy instantaneously.
Well, these are,
and it's just hard for our minds to grasp that kind of stuff. But, hey, I often think, speaking of unusual technologies and all things we don't understand now, is if you were riding in the old West 150 years ago, riding along next to your friend, and you're riding along next to a little stream, kind of plodding along with your horses, and one of you tries to describe to the other, I did some time traveling, and there's this thing in the future called a cell phone. And people talk to each other from long distances away, even from one side of the planet to the other. Well, your friend would say that you were stark raving mad, and I don't know if they had straitjackets back then in insane asylums, but they'd pretty much figure that, and it's only due to a lack of understanding. Look at how, since good old-fashioned cowboy days, look at how technology has evolved. And so when you do start talking about UFOs and ETs and free energy devices and everything, you have to ask yourself, if there is a race out there or multiple races that are 1 million years beyond us in both intellectual and spiritual development, wow, what kind of technology do you suppose they have at their fingertips?
right.
And your dad worked at Martin Lockheed, and so did your grandfather.
Right. These movies, I feel like, are a part of the desensitization of getting the public to these conversations and warming up their mindset to it. And well, now we're at a place where they don't know what to believe with AI, but that's a whole nother conversation. But yeah, so I wanted to be very clear that I did not have an interest in aliens or UFOs. As a matter of fact, I thought it was pretty weird. I wasn't into it. And I was never really into psychics and any phenomenon that was outside of, like when I was a child, I liked fairy tales and I liked, talking about Merlin's castle and things like that. But I mean, as I got older, like I was just such a realist. I was practical, a Taurus. And it was what I see in front of my face. I had left the Christian religion for various reasons. And so I wasn't very, this wasn't my forte, wasn't my experience. So when I met Riz, it wasn't even that I was skeptical. I just wasn't interested. I didn't see anything there for me at the time. So when I did my first circle of light with him, first channeling, and I saw the messages and I got personal messages from my grandfather and my father and my childhood dog and everything that there's no way this new man I just met would know. I, immediately, it was like all my recollection, all of my pre-programming or that download or the awakenings that I've had or the uploads or sending myself up into these ships, whatever all my experiences had been up until this point, all of a sudden, like everything turned on. It was like,
you just led into my next question.
Okay.
You just led right into it perfectly. We must have some sort of telepathic thing going on here.
Okay.
Because what I was going to say was, before the core upgrade that you tell all about your energetic shift in your book. You did have a profound encounter with Riz Mirza's channeling. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if you could actually walk us through that first circle of light experience, and how the messages that you personally received, particularly from your deceased loved ones, prepared you for the extraordinary events that unfolded as your life proceeded.
It was life-changing. It was another life-changing event. I had agreed to meet Riz at his channeling circle to understand what it was about, because at the time we were just working professionally together, and I was just going to do marketing and promotions for his event. I needed to learn about what it was. I've never heard of channeling before, so I wanted to just sit in the back seat, the back row, and just sit back there and just take notes and just kind of understand what it is that I was going to be marketing. Right. And so that's how I was exposed to it, and what I saw. And I had been a student of landmark education for 7 years, and many advanced business consulting courses and international training camps and courses. I've been a student in classroom time ever since. I love learning. So ever since high school, being, I had good grades, and I had very promising future. I didn't go to college because I had kids, but I continued my education, and I continued being in classroom settings and in environments where a lot of people were speaking, and I've myself spoken, and I've been in workshops and kind of experiential workshops where people get emotional, and I've seen a lot. I've met hundreds and hundreds of people and been in lots and lots of rooms before I met Riz. And I sat there in a room full of about 20 or 30 people at the time. And every single person was not only moved to tears, but you can see they were visibly overwhelmed and shaken by the deep, deep soul messages that they were getting from the guides that were channeling through Riz. And they were all accurate down to pregnancies and predictions and whatever things that were coming through that night.
Something I think maybe that would be valuable to interject here, in particular for some of the people, the listening, that are new to all this information, is because you've had so many experiences with several hundred circles of light with Riz Mirza, your husband, and different beings have come through. Could you just deviate for a moment and explain, so that people, and this is contextually when you're explaining about your first experience with Riz, that it wasn't necessarily in Riz's voice. It was a different voice, because he was out of there.
Yes, it's a good point. Okay, so trance channeling is an ancient art, has been around since the beginning of written time, where you have had hieroglyphics and writings on the cave walls. That's how far back this goes, with medicine men and women who have allowed their bodies to be used by higher benevolent energies and intelligence that comes through, and with their own personality essence speaks through a human being, and the human being's face changes, their voice changes, and it's a direct messages that are coming through to the person in front of them or to the group. And so he is considered a master full trance channel, where they have full access to his body from head to toe, and he can channel for I've seen him channel up to 5 hours at a time, and he's channeled over 2,500 or more, 3,000 sessions.
There you go.
In front of groups of people. Yeah. So he's very well known trance channel, and hundreds of thousands of hours of channel material. And he's talked to thousands of people around the world and given messages publicly. So at the time, I didn't know anything about that. I didn't know what that was. And so I had to sit there and, take it all in. And I thought I had an open mind, and I had some acting experience, some acting classes I had taken. And I thought, wow, he's a really great actor. But then as he continued, I was like, wait, how come there's no breaks? And he has no glitching, and he can go for hours and hours at a time, all being in the same way. Like no actors can really even do that. So, and how does he have all this information? And so that's when I started to realize this was outside of my scope once again, which activated the part of me that knew there was more. which is now becoming a favorite coin term of mine. I think I'm starting to say it more and more often, which is for the people who know there's more.
Well,
So,
and you probably personally have observed many times, because you're always there at all of these events, you see when somebody's in a circle of light for the very first time,
mhm,
and an advanced, benevolent, loving spiritual being comes through Riz and speaks to an individual directly and says things that that individual knows, there's no way that he could have known that.
there's no way.
So it's not really Riz that's talking. It is this spiritual being
Right.
that's coming through, and you have witnessed the looks on their face. You can tell by the look on their face, can't you? It's like,
Yes.
look at you're not going to blurt out and say anything, but
Right.
I know that this is a first time experience for that individual, because they never imagined
Yes.
that their favorite Aunt Judy could come through and give them a message that really touches their heart and that's important to them.
Yes.
And a very, very profound experience.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up. He is also a psychic medium. So he does that as well inside of the channeling. But the channeling itself, they say things to the person in front of them that only many times it's only thoughts that they've had, internal thoughts that they've had, they've never said out loud to anybody else.
Right.
And that gives proof that you're not alone, and the guides are there with you. Your guides are there with you. And it's a completely new environment that you don't even know exists. You think it's just this temporal world, this 3D experience. You're living a multidimensional reality. You have many guides and beings that are working with you side by side in being alive, being in this avatar. So it's proof of that. When you see this in person, when it happens to you, that's your proof that you're not alone. So
again, your first experience then, what in particular came through?
So the guide that came through to add more to this was Merlin. Merlin, of all the beings.
Wow.
So Merlin, I had such a close relationship to growing up because of the fairy tales and fantasy world, which could have been a planned thing that they wanted to make sure Merlin was the first guide that I saw, because I already have a connection and a lot of love for Merlin. So I was very open to it. And then the fact that Merlin, technically people think, has not ever existed here on this 3D plane, which, there's some accounts that he actually did exist, but nevertheless, his spirit, his soul made himself very, very known on this planet and channeled through many, many writers and filmmakers and beings who have actually spoken channeled work. So I was just floored and moved, and it opened me up. It was the first time I actually broke down and cried. I hadn't really cried for 7 years. With the death of my father and the divorces and the PTSD, I was kind of a warrior, and I didn't have any space within me to break down. And I had children. And so I cried and sobbed at that session, and I cried and cried and sobbed, and I was shaking. And I knew I was in the presence of greatness. I remembered and recollected all of my past energetic histories, even if I couldn't recall them at the time or even recall any of my visits on any ships, but I could feel what I knew. And it was through my feeling body that I was able to recall, I know more. And also I know that there is more, and I'm in the face of more. And so I immediately became extremely open to all of it immediately. And that sent me on a journey. And because I was so open, then I was ready for my alien experiences.
Okay. And I know Merlin is definitely one of my favorites that comes through Riz. And it's a combination of the wisdom that comes from Merlin and the love that's flowing through the wisdom. And it just touches your heart in a way that you know that it's truth. It's a knowingness. It's not a belief. It's a knowingness. And that's so delightful. And I mean, well, that comes through with everyone that he channels, but Merlin has always been dear to my heart too. Merlin and definitely Chief Red Eagle. He's always so wise in his observations and advice when people ask questions. The advice that he gives is always very succinct,
Mhm.
but always delivered in a very loving way.
Yeah.
And it makes it an irrefutable experience for the receiver, which is exactly what you got on that very first circle of light.
Yeah.
And I love that part of your story. By the way, folks,
Yeah.
Oriah is sharing some things in this segment that aren't even in her book.
Yeah.
And I won't do a rewind, but as we've been talking here, it's like, wow, this is really cool.
Yeah.
Because if you ultimately purchase her book, you're going to say to yourself, well, wow, I remember what she said in that podcast, and that's not even in the book. Wow, how cool is that? So you're gaining extra insights.
Yes, indeed.
As to her personal
I put
experiences.
I put a lot of new information in the book, but I have 15 years worth of just experiences with Riz alone. And I'm not even touching on our work that we've done in opening a healing center and working as shamans and all the work we do. But I'm giving more of an overview, but still I packed it. I know there's going to be more books I'm going to write because there's so much information and things.
Right.
And I wanted to set the stage because everything I'm about to say, everything that I'm experiencing to this very day is because of what happened to me in November 2010. And that gave rise to who I am today, the person I am. So
this is such a great foundation that you're laying in here, Oriah, for what is yet to come. And believe me, folks, there's a lot more to come ahead. Yes. And is it okay if I move on to my next question that I have for you?
Yes.
Okay. So here's what I'd like to ask, and that is the Paris hotel room incident, because folks, her energetic surgery, if you want to call it that, because it wasn't like physical surgery where they cut her open or anything. It was all energetic, transdimensional. Mm-hmm. So the Paris hotel room was where it happened. And that marks your first direct, undeniable contact that you describe in your book. So what was that moment like in that Paris hotel room as you felt an alien presence inhabit your body? And what did you learn then about the nature of these holographic creatures and the polygraph technology that they employed?
So the grays in Paris, I believe that part was physical. And then the part in Marina del Rey, California was definitely holographic. And I'm finding that out more and more. I didn't know what to call it, but I think definitely, even though it looked 3D to me, because when we think of holographic, we think of like something that's see-through. And the thing is, the technology in the future, holograms don't appear as see-through. They appear physical. It looks physical to our standards. Okay. So let's go to Paris. So Riz and I got engaged. We moved in together, Marina del Rey, California, 2010. We're happy. I'm still a pretty conservative person in general, even though I'm open-minded. I grew up in the inner cities, so I was still kind of rough around the edges. And I was not, you can't bully me, basically. I was just too headstrong for you to bully me at the time. So that matters here because of my personality and how it's changed in some ways. My personality, I'm still kind of a stubborn Taurus, but I'm not nearly, I don't have the same personality that I did prior. So here I am in Paris, enjoying, my little trip there with Riz to celebrate our engagement. We are staying in a hotel room and I'm asleep. I had some AI images and illustrations made. I really worked hard to get the right exact memory. That's the one thing I love about AI illustrations. I was able to get almost identical to exactly what I saw in the hotel room. And that's in the book. So I was laying in the bed in the middle of the night. It was dark. The window's off to my left.
Right.
Laying on the right. The door to the entrance of the hotel room is on his right. And so the window, big bay windows facing out to the city, and there's a balcony and the curtains were drawn, but you can see some city lights kind of coming through the curtain. But I was sound asleep.
Okay.
I am awoken in a way that like your head is still on the pillow, but your eyes just open automatically.
Okay.
And I don't know if that's ever happened to you, but your eyes just open. That's like no prep, no warning. You don't even know if you're outside of your dream state. You're still kind of like in an altered state, but your eyes open. And I saw these little, it was foggy because my eyes felt foggy, but I saw
Okay.
these little beings walking around the side of the bed and by the window.
And what did they look like?
They were like big headed and they were like small bodied and they look like the grays, the little grays that you see in the pictures that people have all the time now that you see.
Okay.
And they were about 3 feet high and there was about 4 or 5 of them. And they were kind of milling about, like walking around. But it was
Okay.
weird though, because the impression I got is they came through the window. But I'm in my mind's eye, I was like, well, the window's locked. Like at first I didn't understand how. And then the second thought I have is this real? I don't think this is real. This has to be a dream. But my eyes were open. And I was like, why is my eyes open? So all these thoughts started to click on immediately as I'm trying to process.
Analyzing the
situation. And then I black out. Wake up in the morning. I'm awoken to Riz yelling at me in the bathroom. So the bathroom is directly, if I'm laying on the bed, I'm looking to my feet. On the other side of the bed, at the end of the bed, there's a little door and there's the bathroom. And I heard him yelling, get up, you have to wake up. And that's weird because we had plans to leave early in the morning. I knew I was going to wake up early. I'm an early riser anyway. So it was really strange that I was still in bed. I looked at him very calmly and he was almost dressed. And he says, what are you doing? You got to get up. We're going to miss the train. The train leaves at 7:30 and we got to get to the train station and you're still in bed. And I was like shocked that I wasn't awake at 6:15. And so
where were you going on the train?
To the Louvre. We're going to go see, I'm sorry, to Versailles. We're going to go see Versailles.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was like, and there was only like one train out in that morning that was going to go out that way. So I said to myself, well, I got to hurry up and get out of bed. So I went to go move the covers and jump out of bed like you normally would. And my body didn't move. It was solid rock. It was a complete, like 1,000-pound stone. And I said, okay, maybe I'm still sleepy. Let me try again. I kept trying to get up. I couldn't get up. So then I tried to yell or say help or something's wrong. And I went to go speak and nothing came out of my mouth. My mouth wouldn't open. And I started to get concerned. Like, am I okay? Like, did something happen to me?
Yeah.
And so as he keeps looking at me and he can see I'm looking at him, but I'm not saying anything. So he's getting frustrated and he doesn't know what's going on and we don't have much time. So I immediately felt my adrenaline kick on because I knew something was wrong. And that adrenaline burst gave me enough energy to try to speak. And the only thing I could say with a very dry voice was, there's something in me. I feel something's in me holding me down. Like I can't move. And he didn't know what to think of that. I could barely get the words out. All he could say is just, you have to get ready. We'll deal with this later. And I thought to myself, deal with what later? I don't even know if I can get out of bed. So this went on for a few minutes. I kept forcing myself to try to get up. I was able to finally move the body with this like Herculean force. I had to like get out of bed. And at this moment, I know there was something wrong. Now I knew that I wasn't having a health attack. There was no stroke or anything. I didn't feel anything strange. There was no pain anywhere. I didn't feel any numbness. There was no tingling, no buzzing. So I just knew this. I felt inhabited and I just knew I was. And since I watch Riz being a trance channel, I just put 2 and 2 together. Something told me. I just felt like there was something in me and it felt very massive, the energy field. So, and
you were consciously awake having this experience.
I was 100% awake. The sunlight was beaming through the hotel room. So I get up. I found a way to put pants on and a jacket. I had this little navy blue pea coat jacket. It was cold. I put it on. My hair, I barely could even comb through it. I grabbed my purse. I still hadn't really spoken. And he's already getting ready to walk out the door. So he's just like, let's go, come on. And I reached out to him and I said, there's something in me. I need you to help me. And he grabs my hand and he goes, we'll work it out on the train. I'll figure it out later. Right now, we got to leave. We got to get to this train depot. So
Wow.
he grabs me by the wrist because I'm stiff and he's pulling me. He doesn't know what is going on. He locks the door. He takes me to the elevator and I'm like walking like Frankenstein. I can't even walk normal. He gets me into the elevator. People are there. I feel like they're staring at me. I don't know what's going on. My eyes are probably bugged out. We get out of the elevator and he's literally just pulling me through to the train depot, to the ticket counter. We purchased the tickets. I tried again while he was standing there. I tried again to tell him, Riz, there's something in me. I can't even talk. And he says, we'll work it out on the train. Well, plenty of time. I'll figure it out on the train. And I was getting kind of nervous about this is taking too long. I don't know if I can do this much longer. I don't know what's happening to me. We get to the train. He sits down. He sits in front of me. We had two seats and two seats. And I sat on this side by the window. He sat diagonally on this side across from me. And he settles in. The train starts moving and he goes, okay, if there's something in you, I will get to the bottom of it. I know if you'll have something in you, inhabiting you. Let me see what I can find. Let me see what I can discover. So he starts asking questions to this being. And the conversation between him and this being lasted 20 minutes. Wow. I felt like I was in a dream state. I could hear my voice, but it didn't sound like me. And I knew something else was speaking that was much more powerful than I was. And I was just hoping to God it was a positive being. And I didn't know why there was a being. I didn't know what kind of being. I didn't know if it was an alien. I didn't know what it was.
And you weren't really conscious of what that being was saying through you at that time. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, because I was kind of it felt like a dream state.
You were kind of in a dream state trance.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I saw Riz very intently leaning forward and wouldn't take his eyes off of me. And he was speaking very profound, like the way he was speaking was different. And how he was talking was very advanced, talking about alien technology, cloaking, things like that. And then the being leaves and I felt my whole body release. And it was like I fell back like air coming out of a balloon. And I just fell back and I just felt myself exhausted. And I just looked at him and I said to him, the first thing out of my mind was, they just told me they're going to erase our memories. So everything we just talked about, all this technology, try to remember it, or this conversation about the cloaking, especially because he asked, how do you cloak? And they gave the exact.
You mean as in cloaking a ship, like with a cloud cloak?
Yes.
On a UFO?
Yeah, like a full cloaking device. Like, how do you cloak? How do you cloak
yourself?
And they gave the exact definition, which made total logical sense to my brain and his brain. I was able to hear that part. It was the last thing we said before they left. And then when I started talking to Riz, I said, don't forget the cloaking. And Riz goes, that's right. The cloaking. I'm going to remember that. And he goes, oh my gosh, I'm feeling already they're doing it. So in real time, while we were talking to each other, our memories were erased from this dialogue. We remember the incident happened. We remembered that there was a being, an alien, but we don't remember the conversation. We just have a vague halo effect of what we talked about, but we can't grab onto anything. So only if
I find it interesting how you both had your memories wiped, not just one of you.
Right. And I am going to be booking a session with Barbara Lamb, who is a major figure in the hypnotherapy, alien regression, and doing sessions like that with people who have been through extraordinary events. And
she's quite renowned. She's quite renowned in that field, isn't she?
Yes, and she agreed to do to give me an endorsement for my book, which I'm very excited about. And I'm also going to be booking a session with her, and I'm going to see if we can film it, perhaps. But I want to go back to that time period, and I want to see what was talked about, and see if if it was recorded in my subconscious.
Well, that sounds really exciting, Araya. We'll look forward in future episodes to hearing all about that for sure.
Absolutely. Well, I was really, really exhausted after this event. I didn't really want to walk around Versailles. I was not in my right mind. I felt violated. I was unhappy about this. I didn't know what happened, why this happened, why to me. And I wanted to put it all behind me and just come home. And then when I got home, that is when I saw and felt, and that is when I was approached with the fact that they were going to do the surgery.
Wow.
Thank you, everybody, for watching. This is the end of part 1. Part 2 is coming tomorrow. And these stories are very intense for me. So I need to take a lot of breaks in between. So that's why we're going to finish up part 2 tomorrow, where I go into the actual ethereal alien surgery that changed my life, that I am who I am today, and everything I have done because of this surgery. So I appreciate you listening, and tune in tomorrow and we'll continue.